Alright, ladies and gentlemen. For the past year, Gaijin has done a lot of testing for different elements of balancing when it gets to top tier. To no one's surprise, top tier ground always has been elaborate for Gaijin in terms of testing their new ideas. Most of the player base in this BR bracket are either more experienced or more invested in Warthunder, and that alone makes it the perfect case for testing different mechanics. Despite multiple wonder weapons existing in this BR, the gameplay regardless of the nation was usually fun, and mostly centered around brawling. Gaijin has tested long-range maps with Pradesh and the larger version of Tunisia. It wasn't good because only certain tanks could perform well and it was a heaven for cast due to large empty spaces. End of the day, the most balanced gameplay would probably happen inside the city maps or more lane-oriented maps like Parallel or Sun City. And for those of you who don't know about this, brawling refers to close quarter engagements in Warthunder that most people would totally agree is the best indicator of good gameplay and testing your skills. It's much more fun and entertaining in contrast to long-range engagements. But recent changes to reload times have absolutely ruined the brawling aspect of the game. In the last update, Ariete and Merkava got buffed with a reduced reload time to 5 seconds. Now each of these tanks have their own shortcomings compared to other nations, and on the surface and in a vacuum, this change does sound great. But when you paint the whole picture, right now Russian and Chinese tanks have the highest reload rates of all tanks in top tier. Fastest reload times belong to the Japanese with 4 seconds and a shell that is more than enough to punch through the best tank's weak spots. Abrams, Leclerc, Merkava, Ariete, Gentaro, and some of the challengers, every single one of these tanks is now at 5 seconds for base reload time. On the other side, Russian and the Chinese tanks range somewhere from 6.5 seconds to 7.1 seconds. Now some of you will argue that, well, Russia has Panzer and the longest range AGM in the game. But let's be for real, most of the game is still played on the ground. Successful cast runs can shift the tides of the battle, but never as much as tank brawls. And while this is felt much more from the point of view of the Russian tanks, it is still something that plagues every nation. It's totally understandable that some vehicles need their reload time reduced in order to go against other tanks, but in reality most of the fights are not 1 versus 1 brawls. More often than not, it involves multiple players from multiple angles, and when Gaijin insists on 32-player matches to be a thing, this seemingly marginal change suddenly becomes a huge problem. This increased rate of fire affects many aspects of the gameplay. It increases the chance for steamrolled matches, that one team entirely wipes most of the ground units of the other side and trap them inside their base early game. Before these changes, each tank had different characteristics that forced them to pick different roles in the battle. But right now everybody is a driving powerhouse that can shoot 2 high-pen shells in the span of 10 seconds. It makes picking fights with multiple targets an extremely hard task to pull, and at the same time it minimizes the importance of positioning and your personal performance affecting the match results. Now the skill ceiling of the game is much lower, and the RNG element is felt much more. Did you miss the crew and hit the engine block? Don't worry, another shell will be loaded for you before the poor bastard finds your whereabouts. Your supposed kill shot was absorbed by spotliners? Unlucky you, they can still reload in time and shoot back. So overall these changes has made top tier a total arcade fest that reminds me of COD maps like Rust and Shipment. The solution? Well, as usual, lowering the max player count to 24 or 26. This can reduce the likelihood of overwhelming one team that has slower reload times. It lowers the chance of reload times being the final thing that determines the final results. Undo these changes and try to make each nation good in certain characteristics. Like for example, Ariete could benefit from a faster reload time to be competent against the other tanks. But right now almost all the tanks are at 5 seconds, so Ariete is still technically shit compared to other tanks. Stop trying to equalize every nation with reload time in order to cater to the player base. It's such a cheap way of addressing balancing issues, and it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And to the Japanese mains, please bump up your win-lose ratio, man. I'm sick and tired of going against your submachine gun tanks cause you're so mid that Gaijin won't touch your vehicles. Anyways, thanks for watching and be seeing ya.